hear us? There
Okay,
she
there
goes.
we go. We're
And then
up
we're
she's
and-
good.
gonna share with me so I can.
Yep.
Actually, I've got share screen on here. Oh no, you've disabled it. You have to enable it.
Okay, you're the host now, Tanya.
Perfect. Okay,
Good.
so now I want this one. Lots of options for me to share. Okay, can you see the Revelstoke, the committee
Yes.
agenda? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So there's the agenda. So go ahead.
Okay, I will now start the call to order the Finance Committee meeting of February 3rd, 2021 to order with the adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to adoption of the minutes of the regular Finance Committee meeting of December 21, 2020. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Charlotte, seconded by Councillor Rind. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on, any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we will go on to new business budget. So Lori, I see a little white hand up in front of your face. Is that something that I need to be paying attention to? Did you raise your hand, or is there, what am I seeing there?
No, I haven't done anything.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh no, that was my mouse. Sorry. Oh, that's
Okay.
awesome. I can hide my own face. That's so cool. Awesome. Good. All right. Okay, so I will let you go, Miss McCabe. You can start the meeting.
Thank you very much. So I thought I would just start with a bit of an overview, and I'm going to apologize because you're probably going to listen to me talking a lot today. So please interrupt with me with questions as we go along. So today we're going to be reviewing the operating and capital budgets for the general fund, including the changes that have been made since the departmental budgets were originally presented. So if you remember, those were presented back in the fall of last year and into December. And so they were obviously draft budgets, and some changes have been made and incorporated into what I'm going to show you today. So as a reminder, this is the fund that is predominantly supported by property taxes and impacts obviously the tax increases. And it provides the services like police and fire, road maintenance, snow removal, recreation, and then general government. The budgets for the utility funds, I just want to point out, remain unchanged. The fees have also been left unchanged from 2020, so I'm not going to be reviewing those budgets today because there's been no changes. We'll just look at the general fund. So during the course of all those reviews of all those budgets, you guys asked a lot of great questions, which I really appreciated. You also asked staff to provide options for service level reductions to help reduce the overall budget. This is a process that is challenging for many of the departments, but Lori was able to step up to the plate and identify quite a few options, which we reviewed on January 21st during the workshop that we had. And again, there was lots of discussion at that workshop, which I really appreciated. I took copious amounts of notes, and so I have lots of things. And yeah, so I hope it helped you guys understand and get some answers to some of your questions about some of the different departments and their workings. So we're just going to go over a few of the ideas or comments. I'm going to comment on a few of the things that were brought up during that meeting that actually have a potential budget impact. The first one was the option of reducing service levels in the aquatic center. There was some discussion about potential reduction of the snow removal budget. There was some options for getting unfunded engineering projects into the capital budget that were requested. We also talked about potentially charging non-residents a higher rate for admission to the city's recreational facilities. And there was some discussion about the staffing levels at the fire department and the provision of the highway rescue services. So the first three of these today, we are going to discuss a little bit more detail. So that's the service level reductions at the recreation center, how to potentially fund some of the unfunded engineering projects, and then the snow removal budget. Lori's done some research on charging non-residents a higher admission rate, and she's going to speak to that at a later date. If you've got any specific questions, she's here as well. And then the changes for the fire department staffing and the services, that requires a review of the service level for that department a little bit more in depth than what we were able to do or can do in that time period, that turnaround time. So it is a deeper discussion that needs to be held separately. And so I will talk to the fire chief and the CAO about whether or not we can do that how that looks going forward.
Okay.
So,
Tanya,
yeah.
just before you carry on, so for me,
Mhm.
I'm hearing an echo. It's almost like you're not quite connecting up. So I'm
Oh,
just going to ask if councillors are getting the same,
oh
are
dear.
you getting that same feedback? If you could just put your hand up if you're getting feedback from Miss McCabe as she speaks. So Councillor Elliott, Councillor Brooks Hill, and myself are getting that feedback. So just try again and just let's see what happens.
I'll speak slower.
Okay.
Might be good if you all turn your mutes on as well.
Oh. Ah. Does that help a bit better? Does that make it easier?
So a lot better. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jackie.
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie. So there's only 3 documents that are actually on the agenda today. There will be a few others that I'll show you as well, but these are the 3 key ones. So the first one is the general fund, and this is what it's called Schedule A. This forms part of the 5-year financial plan bylaw that will eventually be adopted. So this is one of the schedules that gets built into it. So there'll be one for the general fund, one for each of the utility funds, and then one that's consolidated. So I wanted to show you what this looks like at this point, and provide some comments on where we're at with it. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it at all. There is some changes that have been made to this that weren't there from prior years. Is that now there's a number of, we've talked or I've spoken in the past about how I'm going to start shifting non-TCA or small capital budget items out of capital and over to the operating budget. I've done that at a preliminary level. And so that does sometimes make the budget numbers go up, like changed year over year in a particular department, depending on how many of those projects they have. There is, if you look at the tangible capital assets line, you'll see that in 2022, there's a large increase. It's almost $11 million. That represents the arena roof project. And then in 2023, you'll see that the debt payments go up. They go from 262 up to almost $400,000 in 2023. And that's to pay for the debt to fund that project. And then the other thing I want to point out too is the net transfers to reserves from operating. That is the annual transfers to the reserve fund for the general fund, and the increase every year. So it goes from 4.8 to 5.2 and up. That is predominantly the increase to the transfer to the roads, or the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund, as we formally call it. And that's that 2% increase, 2% of taxation increase each year that council approved last year. So that goes on for 4 more years at this point. Do you have a question, Jackie?
I do. Some of the numbers in the general fund summary, Schedule A, are a little different. And I'm wondering if that's, different than the departmental general operating fund breakouts. And I'm
Yes.
curious, is that because you've moved some of those projects that are consistent, like moved some to the capital?
Yes. So when we looked at the original departments individually, we were not looking at the capital, like the ones I was going to be shifting over, whereas in this document, they do get shifted over. And so, yes, that would be the predominant reason for the change. I will show you another document that ties in better. And that's the next document. That's one that represents what we looked at previously a little bit closer. But I wanted to show you this one because this is the one that ties into the bylaw itself. Sorry, my dog is trying to get on my lap.
So as an example then, so like Parks and Rec, for example,
Yes.
the budget is showing at 4.2, but in the breakout it's 3.2-ish.
Yeah.
So
there would be some significant non-capital expenditures that are included in there. I actually did look at that number to make sure that it was correct, because it is a bit of a jump and it's higher than the following year's budget. And that's again because we put these projects that are not capital and won't be a tangible capital asset, they get included in this document. And that's the way we have to show it for the purposes of reconciling it to the financial statements at the end of the year. Yeah.
So we have to put it in here because that's
It's
the
to
only
reckon-
way that our capital projects get reflected?
No, it's how the auditors and the year-end financial statements are presented. So this is the way it's done for PSAB purposes.
Okay,
Yeah, as opposed to budget purposes.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So I did want to point out what the, because obviously, as you can see, the net surplus deficit is fairly small at the bottom. When I do finalize these numbers, it will be 0. And so what is making it work like that is of course the tax increases. So in 2021, there is currently a 2% tax increase. So this is made up of 2% of the increase is for the increase in the transfer for roads. And then we needed a 1.75% tax increase for the wage increases in 2021. So there was a reduction in other expenditures by 1.75% to balance that out. So we end up with a net increase in 2021 of 2%. 2022, it is 4.75% increase. Again, 2% for roads, 2% for wages, and then 0.75% for other expenditures. In 2023, we have a much larger increase at this point. It's 7.5% that's being projected, and that's because the debt comes in that year, and that represents a 3% tax increase. And then 2024 and 2025 are both at 4% at the moment, which again is 2% for roads, 1.5% for wages, and then 0.5% for other expenses. So, and then the other thing I wanted to show you, I got to figure out how to change this out, is, sorry, just a minute. Why is it doing this? Sorry, I want to try to figure out how to get it so that I can show you another document, but it's not working. Where is it? My apologies. Why is this so small? Oh, there we go. Sorry. I'm trying to make the screen full size so I can see the little thing at the bottom of it, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, sorry. This is really frustrating. Oh, I can't show it to you. Okay, well, that's going to make some challenges. Sorry. So I wanted to show you the tax increase of this, the impact of this 2% tax increase on the average home. So in the documents, we usually talk about a home that's valued at $250,000, another home that's valued at $500,000, and then we do a third home that's valued at $750,000. So at this point, a 2% tax increase for the house valued at $250,000 on an annual basis will be $16. And then obviously it doubles for a $500,000 home, so it becomes $32 for the year. And then, of course, for the $750,000 home, it's $48 a year. There's no other increases to fees this year, water, sewer, or garbage. So that is the only increase that will be seen on property taxes this year. So, any questions?
Yeah, so is that incorporating the changes that we discussed on the 21st?
Yes, that's how we've gotten there. Yes, and I will show you that in just a minute.
Okay, and there's no other like capital projects that we can delay?
Well, those impact reserve funds, and so the reserve funds, we'll talk about those as well as we get farther into the discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so as we discussed, the next document is the general operating fund budget comparison. So this is the one you've been looking at that's been presented to you on a departmental basis. And so I've given you all of the departments at this point in this document. I did want to comment on some of the key changes that have been made since we originally reviewed these budgets. So the first one is actually in finance and IT. So we have now purchased cyber liability insurance to protect the city against the costs if there's a breach. And so the cost of that on an annual basis is $5,500. So I've increased the insurance budget, which impacts office expenses by that amount. Everything else remains the same. And then in engineering and public works, there's been actually No, there's been no changes. We're good in there. Sorry. And then the other department that's had some changes is Parks and Recreation. So at this point, you'll see there's a lot of changes in the numbers on this one. And these are all of the changes that have been made are to reflect expectations for COVID in 2021. And so for this budget, when we originally did it back in September, it was not clear how long the COVID impact was going to continue on. But at this point, it's fairly clear that it's going to continue on for at least the better part of this year. And so Lori and I have worked through the impacts that this will have on wages and revenues, and they've been adjusted accordingly. So the impact is a net reduction in expense or reduction in expenses of $201,000, and then a reduction in revenues of $144,000. And so that gives us a net savings of, so I'm just going to find my documents that I can't show you. $57,000 reduction in net expenses for 2021. This has also been continued on into 2022, which doesn't show in this document. And in that year, the overall net reduction to the budget is just over $67,000.
Councillor Elliott, did you have a question?
Oh, I'm just, I guess on the parks, we've made some changes, but what are the changes?
So that's a good question. It's one of the documents I was going to try and show you guys. So when we had the meeting on the 21st, Lori presented 7 different options for service level reductions that could be done. One of them was closing on Sundays. The next one was opening at noon on Saturdays. Another one was closing at 6 on Saturdays. There was 2 other options for closing earlier on Monday to Fridays. One was at closing at 8 and one was closing at 7. Another option was closing for the stat holidays. And then the other one was adjusting the operating hours on Wednesdays. And so in 2021, we are showing the impact from being closed on Sundays, because that is the current state. We've also adjusted the budget to reflect the fact that the recreation center is only open from noon until 6 on Saturdays. So we've reflected those budget reductions. And then closing Monday to Friday at 8 o'clock is being reflected, and then closing on stat holidays. So that's the changes that were made for 2021. In 2022, what we've reflected is opening at noon on Saturdays all year long, and then closing at 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, and then closing for stat holidays. So it'd still be open on Sundays, still open later on Saturdays. So those are the impacts that have been built into the budget. Any comments?
Councillor Ryan?
No, that looks great. Thanks.
Councillor Elliott?
So yeah, just generally, I mean, we're just throwing darts here. I mean, we don't know what the response is going to be. We might get a backlash, and it's difficult to build a budget, concrete numbers like that. But I applaud the effort and trying to find savings where we can. But I just want to make sure that we're flexible and are responsive to the community.
Yes. So this, Laura, you want to speak about the opening hours for 2021?
Go ahead, Ms. Donato.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. So basically what we presented to you for 2021 is how we're operating right now. I cannot increase the operation any more than I'm doing right now because of the staffing challenges that I'm faced with. So a part of that is because of what's happening with COVID. So until the situation with COVID resolves, I can't offer any more than I'm offering right now, regardless. So
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do right now is play within my schedule to offer more public opportunities for swim time, and because that's really where we're short right now is the public swims. So by staying open till 8, that gives me an opportunity to hold public swims in the evenings when most of the residents can attend a public swim when they're not working, right? So that's why I suggested to Tanya that we go with the 8 o'clock close versus the 7 o'clock close. That'll give me more opportunity to schedule a couple of different public swims so that more of the public through the facility and using the facility for just leisure time and not swim programs.
All right. Just maybe on that track, then I mean, I don't know how many people are using. I mean, we're sort of making financial decisions. We don't have the actual participant, what it's like at the pool. I mean, if there's only 10 people in there, and it's always the 10 people, we're funding an awful lot of money for 10 people.
So I can tell you right now that our public swims, their capacity started off at 30. We've now bumped them up to 35 and 40. Our public swim times, they're full 2 days before the public swim happens.
No.
So people are utilizing them. Our swim lesson programs are full. The public swims are full. The lap lanes are very popular. They're not always full, but they range. The max capacity is 12 swimmers for lap swimming, and it ranges between 4 to 12. Our senior swim and restorative swims are gaining traction. There are some scheduled slots in the schedule that we need to find ways to bring people into the facility, but the majority of programs that we're offering are being used by the public. It's just our capacity is small, and that's based on the COVID restrictions and the washroom capacity.
Right.
So we are trying to work within the limitations we have, but we're not going to be able to be open for 70 people to come in for a public swim. Our facility cannot manage it the way it's designed. So there are limitations within the existing layout, and that's why we're operating the way we're operating.
And so that gives you the opportunity to maximize your space with the numbers of community members, and still gives you a bit of option if we're down on those numbers, if people want to rent that last hour or something like that too. Is that not correct?
Yes, so if there's an opportunity for an organization who wants to host a program in our facility, then I have more flexibility in when they can run their program. And when organizations run their program in our facility, we don't run it unless we can, at very minimum, recover our costs or make a little bit of profit on it.
Right.
So we don't run programs at a loss.
All right. Thank you for
Be
that.
clear about that. We always run where we're covering our costs at minimum.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Elliott, another question?
Yeah, maybe this pertains to the ballpark and the soccer fields and the parklands that we have throughout the city. Do you foresee participation or those activities being engaged in this summer? What's your forecast?
Yes, I think soccer is back.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we'll know more as we get into spring and the public health orders change. But from what I understand, it sounds like, with measures in place, that soccer will definitely be able to restart. And it's just a matter on whether or not our local soccer association wants to restart.
Yeah.
So Via Sport is putting together the guidelines for restarting the sport, and it's up to the local organizations on whether or not they want to restart. But as far as I know, soccer will definitely be back.
No, I just bring it up because I know Kamloops or a couple of cities have pared back on the field maintenance, and we didn't seem to do that last year. And I was wondering if there was an opportunity to engage on that this year.
Yeah, no, we did not pare back on the field maintenance. The fields were maintained. If you recall, a couple years ago, council approved a budget for sport field revitalization. So as part of our ongoing maintenance program, we carried on with that. And the COVID year has been very good for our fields. Typically, in most communities, groups don't play on the same field they practice. They have playing fields and practice fields. We have multi-use fields where they practice, they play. The field never gets an opportunity to really rejuvenate itself. So this was a really good year for us in terms of field maintenance and really maintaining that asset.
Mhm. But do you, if we did our maintenance last year, I don't know if we need to continue to maintain it if it's not being utilized. I just don't know if it makes sense to me.
I think if I can just weigh in here, I think when we get the playing fields, we've been trying to get the playing fields to this level of maintenance so that the grass is thick, it's lush, it's denser, we have less weeds, there's less maintenance in the long run. And I think by bringing it up to this level and maintaining it at this level, even though we're still cutting the lawn and we're still doing the fertilizing and we're doing that thing, in the long run, it ends up being a better product and stays better. Is that not correct, Ms. Donato?
Yes, that's correct. In other communities, the fields are still being mowed. We still have to maintain them to some extent if they're not being used.
Oh yeah, I just wonder if we needed to. I mean, they were pretty lush and well maintained and buffed, and as good a field as you'd want anywhere last season, and there wasn't a person on it. So I just wonder if it's a legitimate expense.
Well, when we
Anyways.
start when we start looking at recovery and in the long run, then I believe maintaining the status quo on the fields will put us ahead as we move forward, and as the fields get utilized more, and as people start to engage more, and we start to come back out of this, where we start to see the soccer and the field sports take place again, then I think we've got a better hold on our fields, and it's going to be easier to maintain, and we're not always patching and fixing, and in the long run should be less expensive. At least that's how I've seen it. And when I was on the Parks Committee a few years ago, that's how it was explained to me, and that's was our end result, was trying to get to where we actually are now. So I think we're in a good spot.
I agree, Gary. We are in a great spot. We have some beautiful fields, probably the most beautiful fields I've ever seen. But I just wonder if it's a legitimate expense that we can afford. Just my take on it.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Any further comments, or should we carry on?
I just echo what Councillor Elliott is saying. I think we definitely have to maintain them because we don't want to see the asset to get to a point where it costs us more just to get it up to speed. But if it meant reducing the amount that we manicure it, maybe half as often or whatever, depending on how it's being used, and that makes sense to me.
Okay. Any comment, Ms. Donato?
So I would have to discuss that with the operations manager on what impact that would have to the schedule, the maintenance schedule, and how that all works.
All right. Thank you for that.
I mean, we were told that last year that I think we discussed it. We needed to be maintained. There was some work that needed to get done, and I agree. Maybe it needed some help. Maybe it needed some extra work. But this year, if we still don't have activity, that expense has been incurred. So I can't justify it to people who ask me, what are we mowing the lawn for twice a week or every other week, that when there's no one utilizing it. It just seems to make no sense to me.
Well, and sometimes, yeah, I get it. We'll just get into an argument and not get anywhere. But thank you for your point. I think we'll let the operations manager weigh in and tell us what the minimum basics that they can do. Thanks.
Sorry, I think I could add one thing to it, Gary, and that is that it's not just one person on a full-time job doing the maintenance of the parks. And so if you reduce the mowing of the lawns, you're not necessarily reducing your budget costs because you still have to employ the person doing them. That's my understanding. And I do understand that you do have to mow grass at least on a weekly basis. And that's what they did last year. And that's because it has to be maintained. It is an organic plant and it does continue to grow. So it does need to be maintained, at least at a minimum level. I do not believe the operating budget doesn't include any of the rehabilitation. That's actually included in the capital budget.
Great, so. Thank you.
I think I figured out how to share my screen. Can you now see the potential service level changes for the Community and Aquatic Center?
Yes.
Haha. Okay, that's good. I'm going to go back now, though, to where I was before. There it is there. Okay. So I did say I was going to comment about the snow removal budget because I know there was some questions about that, especially given this is a year with low snow levels at this point anyways. I hope I haven't jinxed that by saying that out loud. I haven't at this point reduced the budget for the snow removal, and I don't want to. And the reason for that is because it is based on a 5-year historical average. So I look at the spending for the last 5 years, I adjust them to current dollars, and I look at the average spending level. And then that is where I set the budget. And the reason for doing it this way is because that way in a year when there's less money spent on snow removal, the unspent funds get transferred over to the Financial Stabilization Reserve Fund. And then in a year where more money is spent, we do the opposite. We pull it out of the Financial Stabilization Reserve Fund. And the point of doing this is to smooth out the impact on taxation so that we don't have taxation fluctuating significantly because of underfunded snow removal in a particular year. And as an example of the range of money that can be spent in the last 5 years, the lowest year of spending was 860,000, and that was in 2016. And the highest year of spending was actually, of course, last year, and it was almost 1.9 million. So it was almost double what we spent in 2016. And so where the budget is set for snow removal is in the middle of that. And so it's at 1.4 million approximately. So I just want to make a comment about that because I understand that sometimes there can be a desire to say, well, it's not snowing, so let's not let's reduce the budget to save money. But it is false savings because in the end, if we don't have enough in that stabilization reserve fund to cover a year when it is above the average, then we do have to look at tax increases in the following year, and that's hard to do. So by staying the course, we allow a stabilization of tax increases, and we maintain the reserve fund to fund the over budget years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think from someone who's been here a long time, it is cyclical where we see this go in whether it's 3-year or 5-year increments where we may have a low year, a high year, and a medium year. And by averaging that out, it just keeps that same level of financial savings. So when we have a big year like last year and this year, it's going to be better, or we hope. We still have February and we're only into the 3rd day. So, you know, we hope that we'll be able to keep that. So I think what you're saying makes prudent sense, and the proof is in the pudding. We've seen that over the years and years of watching this and maintaining this budget at this level, and we've pretty well nailed it. Any questions, Councillor Elliott?
Yes, Tanya, do we have a surplus in the Financial Reserve Fund, Stability Fund?
It's not a surplus, but there is a balance in that reserve fund, and it's used to fund things like over budget for the snow removal, as well as it's also used to fund planning exercises, things that wouldn't be funded out of property taxation because they're large one-off expenditures, or because we can't fund them from reserves. So a lot of what is being done out of the Development Services Department is also funded out of this same reserve fund.
Do you know how much it is? I
can show you that in a little bit. If you have some patience for me, then I will definitely show you that, because that is one of the slides I have.
And just in general on the 5-year and the longer term planning, I think I've made it clear that you know, I hope that the transportation plan will have some consideration due to you know, allocated to what it's going to take to minimize or lessen our snow removal expense and our paving expense and all those sort of things that we've been talking about as a planning exercise. That should be reflected in a budget as well, I hope.
It will get there when when it's understood and the impact is understood. And so the way it gets reflected in the snow removal budget is that those 5-year averages, if the costs are actually starting to go down on average, then the 5-year average will start to drop, and then I will start looking at reducing the budget. At this point, I'm actually under budgeting about 50 grand based on the 5-year average, but I'm not going to increase it at this point to make it the 5-year average because I think it'll be fine. So.
Okay, thank you.
but you're right, it is a moving target. So the other part, of course, of the general fund is the capital projects. And so I've given you guys a detailed list. And what I did do is I've highlighted in bold all of the amounts that I will be moving over to operations. So you can see them all in there, all highlighted. So I've done that because I know there's some questions about what exactly I will be moving over. And that way, hopefully it'll help answer some of those questions. So I've also updated the 2020 actual results. So this is the spending to date. There could be a little bit more in here because we've processed all of the checks or the invoices for 2020 as of the end of January. They were all processed last week. Sometimes there's some stragglers that show up though, and so depending on what they are, we may or may not have to put them in here. And so by updating for the actuals, then I can see how much of the reserve funds are actually going to be used in 2020. And then that gives me much better numbers for the reserve funds going forward into the financial plan. And so I've done that in here and shifted things over so that we can see. So what I wanted to point out that for the most part, other than the budget carry forwards from 2020 to 2021, which is all the purple amounts, the other place where there's some significant changes at this point, though there's a temporarily put in here, and this is all the unfunded projects. So I've updated the budget at this point to include all these because I wanted to be able to show you the impact on the reserve funds if we actually put all of these unfunded projects into the capital budget. Most of these are funded. In fact, all of these are funded from the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund. I'm not dealing with the utility ones that Steve showed in his presentation a couple weeks ago. I'm just dealing with the general ones in this slide here, or in this document here. So you'll notice that the Airport Way multi-use plan is in there. That's going to be funded out of gas tax, or it can be funded out of gas tax. So I've shown it as being funded out of gas tax. The rest of it, of course, is funded out of a grant. And this is the grant application that Steve presented to you guys at a previous council meeting. And so the rest of them, though, are all in there funded out of the transportation. There's also one. Oh, actually, there is one more that wasn't in here when the agenda was published. And that is the Transportation Master Plan document. It's not included in this list of projects, and it wasn't included on the unfunded list either, but that's another $150,000 that would need to be spent to get that done. The school safety projects do have a significant cost. Engineering staff are still trying to finalize those, of course. So I have got preliminary numbers in here, but of course, they never go down, they always go up, which is the way things seem to work. And so what I wanted to show you with all of these in there is the impact on the reserve fund. Where is my PDF? Sorry, just a minute as I try to, oh, there it is. Okay, and then I'm gonna go over here. So this is what the reserve funds are looking like. Oh, I don't have the Financial Stabilization Reserve Fund on there. Sorry, Rob, I thought I did. So these are all the funds, the reserve funds that are used to fund capital projects, which is why I've included these ones. And so you'll see vehicles and equipment, of course, is negative. I fund that, or I cover that off by borrowing from the Electric Utility Reserve Fund. And so that's why we have this increase in the internal equipment charges every year, is to reduce this deficit eventually. And the other one, obviously, with all those projects in it, is the Transportation and Infrastructure Reserve Fund. It is red out all the way. And that is predominantly because of the school safety projects. There's just not enough money in this reserve fund to add in those kind of projects at that level. And this is with the 2% increase or tax increase for 5 years added into this reserve fund on top of what was already being put into it. And so this is why that 2% is so important, that 2% tax increase, because if we didn't have that, this would be another $1 million or more worse. And so it does help, but it is just touching the surface. So at this point, we can't actually fund all of those unfunded projects that Steve presented. I have done a review of the reserve funds. And so what I do is I look at the lowest point or the lowest value over the 15 years of where the reserve fund gets to determine how much funding could potentially be freed up. And that's about $250,000. It would pretty much drain this reserve fund by the end of 2023 if we did that. But it is available if council really has a desire to complete some of these projects. And so in particular, I'm talking about the ones that Steve presented, the school safety plans, which is Arrow Heights and Columbia Park. We don't have to worry about the Airport Way multi-use path, these next two, but the bottom one, the Red Devil Hill, is another one. And then the transportation master plan for $150,000. I'm going to look and see if I could potentially fund the last one out of gas tax. So I'm hoping I can. And so I'm going to work on that assumption. So then we're looking at 3 of these, but it's only the first year of the funding for the school safety projects at this point that we can consider. Staff is going to have to really have a hard look at the total cost for these projects and how we're going to actually fund those. So I think Steve's here today if you've got any questions.
Yep. So Mr. Black, just when we look at the 2 school safety improvements and the amounts that are there, 130 for Arrow Heights, 160 for Columbia Park, what will that give us out of that amount of money? Is that just a planning stage, or will that give some physical work done?
Through your worship and members of council, thank you. The 2 school safety program projects are 2 phases. The first is just to enhance the signing and allow RCMP and our operators and the transit or the school buses to utilize the spaces in front of the schools appropriately with the proper signage, which is not in place. And so those 2 projects are on the order of $30,000 to $40,000 just for the signage. The remainder of those funds is based on a percentage, roughly 10%, for contingencies and engineering for the final improvements, which would then include improvements to storm drain, curb gutter, sidewalk, providing appropriate parking where needed. And so the 2021 spend is shown here is the first phase of signage improvements and the engineering design work so that we could then tender the final product the year after in 22. Council, of course, has the option to defer one of the projects for another year. Opportunity to at least make the signage changes is a huge benefit to the community and to both schools. My initial discussions with Mr. Hooker at the school board was that they would also be interested in cost sharing. We have not included that because that has not been formalized at this point in time. And so those are 2 options or some thoughts for council's consideration. And we'd like to get some direction from you to make these things happen. We all know that Arrow Heights seems to be the most vocal of neighborhoods related to access and enforcement with the ski hill adjacent or traffic to the ski hill. Columbia Park on big snow years obviously becomes an issue due to the lack of sidewalks in the area. So we know where we need to go. I would also I would ask council to consider also that the transportation master plan will then also allow us to configure sidewalks and figure out where sidewalks are needed for the community in the long term. And so there is some benefit to getting the transportation master plan out of the way for both the active transportation, bicycles, pedestrians, out of the way this year, which then will help inform the big picture for the safety around the schools also. Thank you.
Councilors, any comments, councilors, questions? Councilor Elliott.
Stephen, sorry, Mr. Black, I don't see the 150,000 on this on the sheet that's in front of us here. You said it was $150,000 for the transportation plan?
Correct, and that was not on this list. in error. I did not provide that with the presentation to you 2 weeks ago, approximately.
Okay. And signage, how effective is signage at this point? Like, do you think it would have an impact?
I believe it would have a significant impact, mainly because the way we have signed the two schools at this point in time make it very, very difficult for the RCMP to enforce any sort of parking regulation and or safety. And so adding these signs is a critical component in order to improve the safety at these schools as this first step.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Brooks Hill suggested a while back about an overall reduction in the speed limit in our community, maybe to 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. Do you think that would help the cause there on the school's safety?
Well, when school is in session, that is the required speed limit due to provincial and federal law. And so the schools, it's mostly people not going fast because there's too much traffic there. It's people just utilizing whatever space is available to drop. And so people are double parking. They're parking in front of the fire hydrants. They're parking in front of driveways. Oh, I've just got to run in to talk to the teacher for a minute, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so without the proper signage, we cannot enforce the traffic laws in those areas, which leads to the chaos.
So it isn't sidewalks, it's more the speed and the parking issue.
Well, from a safety standpoint, the kids are having to walk on the roads because there are no sidewalks in front of. And so in my opinion, having those sidewalks is extremely important as a place where parents can drop their kids off next to a sidewalk. They open the door on a sidewalk and they're no longer in the traffic way. So that's the big picture though for our final improvements. Now also, this is a high priority for the community, I believe, and for council. It's been this way for many more years than we probably would all like to acknowledge. And I think deferring it is something that council could consider. And with your recommendations, we can do that. The big picture, though, is that we do need to make these improvements in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Are you looking for a direction from us now, or what? I mean, personally, I think the signs are a big step forward, and I think the transportation plan is next. To get a complete picture before we start throwing a lot more money at sidewalks and the way we move people. So that's my take.
Now, and through your worship, Councillor Elliott, there is, of course, the option to pursue not this original budget expenditures, but as Director McCabe has presented to you, just doing the phase one improvements and then pushing out the design work for the ultimate improvements till the year 2022. What that does do is it makes it difficult for us to ensure that the drawing packages that we would then go out to consultants in January of next year and try and be ready with these drawings within 2 or 3 months so that we can get them tendered and those improvements built in 2022. And so it does provide a real crunch for us in order to do the design work to achieve that goal of construction in 2022. So it may turn out that we would then have to push the construction into 2023. Of course, from a financial standpoint, those are all decisions that we would support.
So as we move forward, Mr. Black, ideally, what would be the best situation for safety for our kids around these schools? You know, we're all bearing in mind that schools are still in session in these two facilities anyway during COVID times. So how, we deal with the signage, we deal with the plan, and then get things ready. Is there ways of doing it this year without an awful lot more expense to our community so that you have ready-made plans and can actually get the work done in 2022?
Through your worship, in my opinion, the best solution to move forward to achieve construction completion in 2022 is to fund the phase 1 improvements and design work this year. The second option would be to not do the phase 1 works of roughly 30,000 per site, leave things status quo, and then reduce the expenditures and just do design work for the ultimate condition for construction in 2022. And so we could reduce the 30,000 expenditure for both locations if council would authorize staff to pursue construction or design of engineering design drawings for the ultimate condition to be achieved in 2022.
Okay. So what are we looking at for figures then for that? Hard to see my small eyes. We're at 900,000 on one and
Yeah, approximately,
800,000.
but these are actually, so the 2021 numbers are actually, they were numbers that were provided, but they've been updated, so they should actually be now. I've got Arrow Heights School for 2021 at 105,000 and Columbia Park School at 127,000. I'm not sure what those numbers include, though. I'm assuming that's signage and engineering drawings.
So the 30,000 were both just the step 1 of making parking and
Just the
traffic
signage
throughout the school areas.
Okay.
Only signage and allow it to be enforceable. If we choose not to do it, leave things as they are, then we would just have to go through the regular, we could save that money. So 30,000 per site and just go straight to design works for both schools. And the totals should be around 900,000 for Arrow Heights and 1.1 for Columbia Park, all in, including design and contingencies.
Yes. So what would be just design for 2021? Would that just be then, so the difference for Arrow Heights School between the 105 and the 30 is 75,000. So is that what you're saying? That's the amount for the engineering work, right?
Correct.
Yes. And then at CP Hill is 130 less 30. So it'd be $100,000 for CP Hill. My comment is at this point, there's no budget and there's no funding yet to actually do the construction projects themselves. We'd have to look at how we're going to fund those without cutting back on other roads projects. And so that's where the crunch will be. But I think getting design drawings is a really good step, because then if there's grants available, we can apply for them.
Okay. Councillor Shalat had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I would just hesitate. I realize maybe financially it makes more sense to do everything in one lump chunk, but does delay the improvements to the school safety for another year, where this has been a long conversation for a long time. If the signage would the signage make an impact on the safety for this coming fall?
In my opinion, Councillor, yes. Anything we can do to allow enforcement and to simplify operations around the school at those critical morning and afternoon hours is a benefit to the schools and to the community.
So then, Your Worship, in my opinion, it would be irresponsible of us not to go forward with those moves. I recognize that we are trying our very best to keep this budget super tight, and that is admirable, and we should definitely continue to do that. But it would be really nice to see some progress on school safety this year.
I agree. I think every one of us around this table have been advocating for safety and for our children, and as our department heads have as well. So I guess I want to look at it and say, okay, what's the bottom line? What can we get away with? We can have safety and still get some planning done for subsequent years. And that may be very well in front of us, and I'm not reading it as a non-accountant. I may not be reading that right. So if there's some words that you can give us, Ms. McCabe, regarding
I
what the
can.
bottom line would be, then I think we need to hear that.
I think if the committee can make a resolution that we include the first year of costs for the Arrow Heights School and CP in Columbia Park School into the capital budget. So add those two unfunded projects into the budget for 2021. And then the cost for that would be $105,000 and $127,000. And then I will build that into the budget that gets presented to council.
Councillor Elliott?
So Tanya, you just suggested to throw in the engineering costs for this design. Is that what I get?
It is. If that's what the committee would like to do, then
So
yes.
I think everyone agreed that the signage is an obvious win for both schools.
Yes.
And Mr. Black suggested it as well. I'm comfortable putting basically it's another $150,000 into the capital for this year or 2021 is that we don't know if the school board could possibly contribute to that. Is that right? I mean, they're going to contribute to the actual construction costs. They will also likely contribute to the engineering costs. That would be a negotiating procedure, I guess. But first of all, you have to run this through them to make sure that they're on board. And I don't know if we need to engage that this year. It'll be an ongoing multi-year project.
Yeah, so if that was the committee's desire instead is to just do the signage and not the engineering, then that would be an additional $30,000 for each school into the budget.
Yeah, rather than 200 and something. Yeah.
Yeah, 235,000 in total.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just so that we're all aware, Mr. Black is trying to tell us if we don't do this planning this year or allocate some funds for it, that may put off the construction of some of this stuff till 2023. Am I correct with that, Mr. Black?
Through your worship, yes, you are absolutely correct.
Okay, so then the question comes, I know that we're trying to pinch pennies as best that we can and make sure our community's safe and still get these projects underway. Is that something from a financial perspective is going to make much difference in the long run if we plan this now, Ms. McCabe, or allocate these funds, or are we better off to put this aside knowing that we're not going to get funding, but is there a chance that we're going to get funding elsewhere? And I guess, we put that in the budget, and if the funds aren't there, we just don't go forward. Is that our option?
It could be. And so, like I said, I think that it's really important for the committee to be on the same page as far as whether they want to support adding just the signage or the signage and the engineering costs, or just the engineering costs, I guess would be the other option to that too, because there is a budget impact. At some point, the money needs to be spent if we're going to make any changes to these areas. Whether that is done before or after the transportation master plan, I think Mr. Black would be better at speaking to which is a better approach. But yeah, so in the end, the money will probably have to be spent. It's just a matter of when. Okay.
So that still a bit confusing as far as that. So when we look at it, so when we talk about engineering and the amounts of money that you're talking about, Mr. Black, that's not including signage. So we're talking, as Councillor Elliott has said, 150 grand extra over and above. We don't know which hat we're going to pull that out of or where we're going to get that from. But we're looking at, we don't want to add an extra 1% to a tax increase in a year when people are having a hard time, but we also want to make sure that we have safety. So it comes down to a decision for us on council as to what's going to be the best. Any further words, what you think would be best? And then I'll go to Councillor Ryan. She has her hand up.
Sorry, from me?
Either you or Mr. Black. I know what the wish is. Let's try and get it all done as soon as possible. And then I'm looking at it going, okay, is there a magic rabbit hat that we can find to pull money out of, or am I just dreaming And the prudent thing is let's just do the signage and move on.
I'm running out of magic rabbit hats, unfortunately.
Okay.
Your
All right.
worship, Tanya, if I may, could you go back to that 2021 budget sheet that we had presented a couple of weeks ago?
I can.
At the hotel?
That one there?
Please. So
Yes.
this one would include that 30,000 for the phase one, the 2021 spend as presented to you a couple of weeks ago,
Okay.
and the design for the ultimate improvements. So the $290,000 would include that phase one improvements and design work for both locations.
Okay.
The 2022 spend is the estimate that our engineers have put together for those improvements, which we still need to find a fund mechanism for that.
Okay.
So the best option for us to achieve next year's, and I say 2022's construction cycle, would be to get this design work done this late summer, fall of 2021, so that we could tender it early in 2022 and get our best prices, but from contractors for the summer construction cycle in 22.
Okay. So I'm going to go at Councillor Ryan. She had her hand up, and then I'll make another comment. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you. I think I just need some help understanding how the 1% will be used. So once a percent increase is passed, then that's permanent, right? Or would that then insinuate that next year it would be reduced?
No, it's 1% then gives you that money in perpetuity.
Right.
So for
And because this is a
2021
capital expense, why would we be doing that in perpetuity?
The 2% you mean that we're doing every year?
No, I mean,
No.
Oh, because he commented, because he said 1%.
Yeah. So like
well,
in theory, like I don't have any problem personally approving that this money gets spent to make those plans and have the engineering plans done up, but or the signs and the engineering plans done up, but then there shouldn't be any reason that should continue in perpetuity, right?
it wouldn't need to. So there is a potential where we could bump up if we wanted to do a 3% tax increase this year, 2% to go to roads, and then 1% for these projects. Then it could be accommodated and removed out next year. It takes a little bit of formula.
Right. So I think that's what you were kind of alluding to there is what I've never seen happen in government.
No,
So,
no.
so I think my hesitation in going forward with that is the permanent increase to taxation doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but spending the money does. So maybe we, increase some amount to reserves, or we use reserve money, but I don't see why we have to increase taxes permanently. Like, isn't that why we have reserves?
It is. And so that's where we're trying to make sure that we maintain the increase to the transfers into the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve, or the Roads Fund, as we call it in short form, is to fund these kind of projects. The challenge is that reserve fund doesn't have it doesn't have enough balance in it to cover all these projects at this point. Because there was some underspent funds in 2020, then there's been a freeing up of there's about $250,000 that's available. It does draw that reserve fund though down to almost nothing by the end of 2023. And so that's kind of the risk that we run, right, when we approve too much in the way of capital projects. So it depends on how much Steve wants to spend on fixing roads in the next couple of years, whether or not there's, so at this point with these particular safety projects, it's potential that we can make it work to get in the signage and the plans. How we actually get to building them will be another discussion, because at this point there's no money available in the reserve funds to cover those costs, which means it needs to come, another project can't be done if we're doing these ones. And that's a bit of a review that Steve and I have to do, or Steve and his staff have to do, of the roads projects that they have planned, and whether or not they can shift things around to accommodate these large projects, because they are significant. They spent $1.5 million down on Lower Town this year, so that kind of gives you an idea of how that compares to these project costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So personally, I think I'm comfortable with going ahead with those plans, but not improving or increasing taxes. And then having that conversation about how to fund those other
Mhm.
capital projects when we get there, because who knows, we may have grants available. And so
Yes.
that's
Yes.
my opinion. I'm
And,
happy to
and
make
there
that
could be,
motion.
and that is definitely the benefit of doing the plans up
Mhm.
first, so that we're ready. We have 'em shovel ready, I think is the word that Steve likes to use.
And if I might, through your worship, we could, just do some investigative work at Red Devil Hill. And so we could defer some of those funds there to next year. I don't have an estimate in front of me now, but it would likely be on the order of less than $10,000 just for us to figure out what we need to do at Red Devil Hill. And so we could defer, 60,000 or so from there. The key projects for us, obviously, is if we do win the grants for the multi-use path, we will need to do our match. The safety projects and the transportation master plan, those are, in my mind, the most critical components that the community needs, not only for the transportation master plan, but that will also feed the OCP update, and it will also feed the DCC bylaws. So important things that are in our wheelhouse for this year in order to achieve the goals for your goals for the OCP and DCCs.
Councillor Ryan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess personally, I think if we're going to allocate that $75,000 to 2021, that we should get it done, but that's just my opinion. Yeah.
And you're absolutely correct, through your worship. The amount here is, in the big picture, is relatively small from the department's budget. And so, but every penny counts in this environment. And so at your direction, we can certainly pursue pushing some things around in order to minimize those impacts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Just so I'm clear. So on the picture here, Arrow Heights Safety, 130, Columbia Park, 160. The two signage the signage components for that would be 60,000 for both. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So that leaves $230,000, which is 1% or roughly 1% of our annual budget. Right, Tanya? That's the one.
Yeah, well, the operating budget, yes. Not the capital budget, but
and
the
the 200
budget, yeah.
and the transportation plan is estimated at 150.
Correct.
To me, that you pegged it. The OCP and the transportation plan are the essential things that we need to get on the table. We need to know where we're going, how we're going to get people around, and how we're going to develop our city.
Yes, and I was just going to say the transportation master plan. I've got other options for how to fund that doesn't need to come out of the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund, and so that's why I haven't mentioned that one.
So anyway, but we're not even taking this Columbia Park and Arrow Heights is not coming out of the Transportation Reserve Fund.
It is.
I thought we were taking out budgeting, taking money into the budget.
That's the idea, so that if we add these to the budget, they get funded out of the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve Fund because they're related to transportation.
But we collect it in taxes. We're raising this year's taxes to pay for that. Is that right?
No, we're raising the 2% tax increase is the increase in the transfer to that reserve fund that was approved last year. And it's 2% additional taxes, like a tax increase of 2% every year for 5 years that gets put into that reserve fund. And then after that, the increasing stops. And that's to build up the reserve fund because it definitely doesn't have enough money in it to fix and do all these projects that need to be done. So yes, the extra 2% is going into that reserve fund to fund everything that reserve fund funds. These would be some of the things that we would fund with it. Sorry. Does that make any sense?
No, not really. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to say, why are we talking if you're just going to take it out of the reserve fund anyway? You could reallocate in the future whatever priorities come up. Is that?
We could. This was, yeah, these were added after the budget was discussed with the committee. So this is why we're talking about them now. So we want your
Okay.
support. Yeah.
So we're not talking increasing taxes by 1%.
No.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I'd make that motion, not to increase them, but to go ahead with these projects, if that's, anybody wants to second it.
That's the two safety school projects.
And the engineering drawings.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The signage and the engineering
Yeah,
for both schools.
yeah.
May I, okay, but isn't the transportation reserve meant to pave the roads, then the potholes and sewer?
And it provides for sidewalks and curbs and things
Yeah.
like that as well. Yes.
So just sorry with me on this.
Yeah.
But if we're planning for sidewalks at the school, but we don't know how to fund the actual result of that plan,
Mhm.
why would we do it a year in advance if we got to wait 2 years down the road before we actually get some actual commitment to funding it? So we haven't even had the discussion about funding those, $2 million project for sidewalks, but we're having a discussion about the plan. And I'm just trying to understand why we're doing that. That seems like quite a bit of lead time. I know if we do it now, we can build in 2022, but then we'll have to have that discussion in 2022 about the money. So we're jumping a lot of things all at once.
We do. And so in the municipal world, what we try to do is we try to get the plans done first. So that, especially for major infrastructure projects like this, so that if there's an opportunity to apply for a grant that would fund these kind of projects, that we're actually ready to go.
But are we diluting it? Because we have a lot of projects in the queue. All right, are we just adding another project that we just, should we nail the ones we have got in line right now, or?
I'm not sure how many projects we actually do have in the queue, Steve.
Oh, maybe that's a better question. What projects do we have in the queue?
We have quite a few projects in the queue, mostly related to stormwater design and some engineering. We've got some lift station work. Obviously, all the curb, gutter, and sidewalk in accordance with the pavement management program. Potentially this multi-use path at Airport Road. There's also the grant that was submitted in partnership with the Little Shoe Shop and RMR to build a multi-use path all the way up to RMR from Airport Nickel. The Mountain's going to be building a new reservoir for us, which we will be cost sharing with this coming summer. We've got RMI money to make improvements to Williamson Lake Road and provide a new shower room. We've got the studies for the arena roof to undertake, and if the results of that study, which will be presented to council, indicate that we need to do that work, then obviously we'll be doing design work with an architecture and structural HVAC consultants to get that ready to go for 2022 also. So in addition, we also have all these planning documents that were underway. The transportation we want to award in a couple of weeks. The liquid waste management plan. We've got a stormwater master plan being developed, and we're almost done with our water model. So from my perspective, we have a ton of work to do this year.
Yeah, and that's what I anticipated as well, Stephen. I'm just curious, will the sidewalks be beyond our scope right now in 2022?
And as described as I presented to you when I first arrived here, we've got a lot on the go, and we achieved a lot last year. We delayed starting a lot of the projects that were budgeted for until the fall, and now we're awarding some of those projects now because construction took so much time. And so the winter is late fall and winter. This is when we need to do all that design work for the coming construction cycle. And so we do have to find the time to do that in order to achieve these goals that council puts in front of us. And so we would obviously farm this out. This will go to a consulting firm. Then we just have to manage that consultant.
But to actually initiate it, we to build those sidewalks in 2022, we would have to say, okay, we've got 10 other projects on the go, and we would have to prioritize which ones you should chase, or you find your capacity where you'd have to define your capacity first, and then we would say some priorities to make where to spend the money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, Councillor Elliott, I would feel comfortable that we could achieve these two projects on your behalf because they are a priority for the community and have been for many, many years. And so as you have described, yes, something may have to give, but I feel confident that we could achieve the goals that you have identified in our plan for this year. And should you choose to make this a priority for 2022, we would achieve that goal also.
Maybe, sorry, one more question. And has the school board give you an indication of what they're willing to contribute?
No, and that is when I prefaced this discussion, the school board, Mr. Hooker and I did have that discussion, and he was keen on in helping us achieve some of these initial goals. So out of that $30,000 that we're expecting to expend just for the phase 1 improvements, I would hope that they would come to the table and participate in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so those discussions I've not had any other further discussions with Mike since that time. And that was actually last spring when that happened. And so not knowing the status of the school board's financial situation at this time due to COVID and what the schools are going to look like next year, that may also have some influence on how much of a priority this is.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of unknowns, but as Director McCabe has described, having these plans on a drawer ready to go is something that is beneficial to us. And obviously, and as you know, the longer we wait to do these things, the more they cost. And so even just having the drawings in a drawer is going to be beneficial to us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Black. So, councilors, as we talk about this, Councillor Ryan was going to put a motion on the table to put these together. See if there was a seconder to do these things that are in front of us. So my question, and I'll ask this one last time, if we are to agree to these projects that are ahead of us and we put them on the table, we still have to look for funding, or are we automatically saying, yes, we're going to accept these and it's going to be a 1% bump over the 2% that's already projected for overall property taxes? That's a question to you, Ms. McKibb.
No, will you be committing to the spending for 2021 to get the signage in place and the and/or the drawings, the engineering done, and then we would have a further conversation next year as to how we would actually fund the rest of these, the actual building of these sidewalks and things like that.
So by putting this forward, we're not committing to another 1% tax increase for
Not
the
at this
taxpayer.
point, no. That would be something we would review and we have to actually determine how to pay for these
Okay.
projects in the coming years.
All right.
And that's kind of,
Councillor Ryan?
yeah, that's
Go ahead.
good too, because then, as Councillor was mentioning, it gives us a chance to approach the school district and have that conversation.
Correct.
It does. It does. Yeah, it's like the actual 2022 spend that's being presented is a fairly significant number. That's more than what we spend normally on road rehabilitation, which is set at $1.5 million every year, and so this is more than that. And so yeah, it's a significant spend, and so yes, it's going to take some reviewing of how we could go about actually funding that, whether it be from grants, from reserves, which are funded from taxation, of course, or potentially debt.
Councillor Ryan?
Would this qualify for a DCC project?
I don't think so, because it's an existing school servicing existing housing. I also looked at whether or not we could potentially fund part of it from gas tax, but again, we might be able to fund some of it, but not that much, not all of it. So that's where the review and the
wonder
review
if
of how we're going to fund it.
I wonder if CACs would qualify, because it's like, you could argue that increased traffic in certain locations because of certain projects impact the schools in those areas.
That I don't know. I don't know what the qualifications are for a community amenity. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what would fall under that category, unfortunately. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It just might be an interesting
Mhm.
thing to talk to
Yeah.
Marianne about.
Okay, going to go to Mr. Black and then to Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. One other thing to consider is that once the drawings are done, we could also think about phasing those improvements so that we wouldn't have to have a $2 million spend in 2022. But once the drawings are done, then we can consider the best way to allocate resources that we have available to achieve the best outcome that we can over a period of time. Now, as you're aware, much like the City Hall project, trying to do pieces sometimes costs more.
Yep.
So we would also have to take that into consideration, but knowing that we don't have $2 million laying around, it might be beneficial for us to come back to council once we have the drawings done with a spending plan, which may be more palatable to you as a council and to the community.
Good. All right. Appreciate that. Councillor Charlotte and Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, for that too, Your Worship, especially with the design coming in around the same time as our transportation master plan, just looking at how the big picture of our community getting around and active transportation, I think rolling the school safety improvements into that bigger picture should help with the phasing as well. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to get some grants so we can really design this smart as we go forward if we're spending that kind of money.
Yes. Okay. Councillor Elliott.
Tanya, the $290,000 that is coming, that will come out of the Transportation Reserve Fund. Do you see that as detrimental?
Well, it is in the sense that it will reduce the fund down to having nothing in it, which isn't ideal. But but I also see the importance of getting these projects done. And so I understand that too.
Mr. Black, $230,000 for engineering. That seems pretty steep to me. What do you think?
The Engineering and Geosciences of BC has a publication out that I can find for you on the website, which talks directly to complexity of projects versus flat work like this is versus a vertical project. And typically engineering fees are around 8 to 10% for projects of this nature. And so we've gone, I think, with 12, and that would include some contingency funding in there. Once we go to the market with the design proposal for these two sites, this is our best guess at this point in time. The numbers may be less. I don't believe they will be more. As you know, I'm very conservative about spending the city's money, and I don't like to go over budget. And so I'm comfortable that we can get the design work for this or less. Yeah. So 100,000 for Arrow Heights and 130 for Columbia Park. We may be less than that, but at this point in time, it's the best numbers that I have.
Right. We already have extensive engineering for the area with the roads and the structural stuff that's in place. I just think that, it's just seems pretty exorbitant. But
Councillor, should the numbers come in less, obviously that number would then go back into one of Tanya's funds.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. Any further comments on the subject in front of us, and then we can move on. Councillor Brooks Hill, do you have any comment?
I'm in favor of going ahead with the engineering and the signage, and then we'll see what it comes back, and we can make the final decisions next year around this time.
Okay.
Oh, should someone second my motion?
Council Ryan had put this motion forward to go to council, suggesting that these items, including the engineering, be put forward. Someone want to second that?
I believe the only one that can, other one that can is Councillor Elliott, because it's just the
Oh, yeah,
two.
that's right.
Oh, sorry, Councillor
and
Schmidt
me.
too, because she's, yeah, and you, yeah.
Okay. So Councillor Elliott, any comment on that, or Councillor Charlotte regarding this?
I agree the signage will make an impact. I would be hesitant, but yeah, let's get this thing. If it's not going to affect our tax take on the citizens, then let's do it.
Okay, so seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on this motion? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. And that was
Okay.
carried unanimously, Ms. Morrison, for the record.
I'm sorry, Mayor Salt. I just wanted to ensure that council has put back into the budget the funding for the transportation master plan, which I don't think is included.
Yes, that we will do out of gas tax funding, so, or the
Thank you.
finance,
So that's still there. Yep.
yeah,
Thank you very much. Sorry
All
for
right.
the apology, interruption.
that's
No,
okay.
no problem. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
so at this point, thank you for the input and thank you for the guidance, because that's really appreciated. That helps me finalize the numbers for the budget. The next point will be now, so we needed to make decisions about the unfunded engineering projects, which we've done, which you've done, which is great. So assuming there's no other changes at this point that the committee would like us to look into for the budget, the next step is actually to pull the whole budget together and present it to council. And the intention would be to do that at the meeting at the end of February. So if the committee in general is happy with the way the budgets are looking and the tax increase the way it's looking, just ask for a resolution to support staff doing that, and then that will be the next step.
I have
So
a
before
question.
Councillor
Yep.
Ryan has a question before we move on.
Yeah, so I have a huge list of feedback that I've compiled from people in the community. And I know I mentioned some of them in our last workshop, but I wanted to say some of them out loud just to get feedback for the public so they are aware, why some ideas aren't viable.
Okay.
I don't know if the best time to do that would be now because we don't have Ms. Lowe here or the other departmental managers, but
Do they
it's
have
up
a
to you.
budget impact? Are they going to have a budget impact?
Yeah, some of them do. And then one of them's my own idea that I just want to talk about. And I
Okay.
don't know if it makes more sense to do it here or there.
Preferably here, because I'd rather know what the ideas are now, so
Okay.
because we can, if we need to, we can have another finance committee meeting
Okay.
so that I can, research and incorporate or show you what the impact of those would be on the budget
Okay, awesome.
going forward. Yeah.
So because you've done the work to go out to the community, Councillor Ryan, I think the prudent thing would be to hear what you have to say. It may take us down a bit of a rabbit hole or off course just a little bit, but you've gone through this work to reach out to the community. So let's hear what you have to say. And then Ms. McCabe kind of has an idea, and then it may have a way of dealing with the budget before it comes to council. So
yeah, I think most of the items have been addressed in some way, but maybe just not for the public. So they're just like, why isn't this happening? And if they heard it, then they'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I also really have to go to the washroom. Could we take a few minute break?
good break. Let's do that. We
Okay,
can all
sorry.
do that. Thank you. Appreciate
Okay.
that. So.
See you in 5. Do I need a big piece of paper, Jackie?
I don't think it needs to be big because I think some of them we won't have to talk about for too long, but maybe.
I have
A
lots of
piece
paper.
Okay,
We have
cool.
I have lots of paper. Oh, I should have grabbed something to drink. Darn it. Oh well. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to run over and grab something to drink. I'm just checking to make sure Jennifer's back.
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, should we go ahead, Gary?
Yep, go ahead, Jackie, please.
Okay, great. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was something I was thinking about, but I don't know if it's possible. And it's about donations. I know that most people, taxpayers, probably don't want to donate to the city, obviously. But I was wondering if there has ever been any discussion about adding a little box to our property tax bill that says, like, you know, the cost of living has really gone up, especially for people, you know, taxes are difficult for people on fixed income or low income people to afford them. If you're interested in adding a contribution that would go towards, I don't know, like transit for low income people, like how we provide subsidized fares, or we could say, you know, that it's going to go towards our affordable housing reserve or wherever those MRDT dollars go, something like that. That I think there's probably a few people who are out of town owners that would consider donating. And in my research, I found that it is apparently tax deductible if we're a registered community, which we are. So I guess when people donate money to like the splash pool or project specific stuff, they would then be registered a receipt or issued a receipt for that donation. And so a similar thing could happen if they donate money with their tax bill. Anyways, I don't know if that's crazy or if people have already thought about doing that, or if you think nobody would go for it, but curious to discuss that with council and staff.
Ms. McCabe?
That's an interesting thought. It's never something that's crossed my mind. We do have different projects where there is fundraising from the community and donations are provided. So the splash park and the skateboard park are the two most recent examples of that. I believe the aquatic center was also one of those, but that was before my time, so I might be speaking out of turn. So yes, if somebody wants to donate money to the city, it can be done as a charitable donation. And so there is a potential to give people tax receipts. Obviously that creates some work and some burden on the staff to do that kind of thing, but there is a potential to do it. It's just a matter of figuring out how to get the best bang for our buck, so to speak, out of something like that. And whether or not we could have somebody donate and have it donated to like a designated fund, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know what, I'm not sure. That would be something
Okay.
that would need to be researched for sure. I'm not sure if you've got examples of other communities that have done that. If you can send that to me later, that would be really great.
Yeah, I will
And then,
definitely
yeah,
send that.
it would
So-
certainly,
Sorry.
it's certainly a potential option for some, like I said, splash park, skateboard park, things that are very specific capital projects for specific user groups. That's probably the most successful to do.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are more that on a,
Yeah.
annual basis,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be everyone. A lot of people, they might have their opinions about how efficient or inefficient the city is, and they might not want to support that. But I think, you add a few sentences just speaking about the community and the impacts of tourism. And I think there are people who would say, you know what, yeah, like I can afford an extra $50 this year. And I would be interested to see what the reception is, even if, we just try it this year to see get it work. And so in the budget, I would love to see if you can, see how much resources it's going to take from the finance department to manage that. Because certainly there will be an added expense there. And then it can just be used as like a trial period to see if it works. And if there is any reception, maybe we can add some kind of communication support behind that campaign to try and maybe it works with economic development, and they are working with the RAA, and I'm not sure how it could work, but in the perfect world, right, there's a way for, beyond just property owners, really rich heli skiers who come here to enjoy our community, to acknowledge that there is an impact, and that by them being super, super wealthy, it makes it really unaffordable for people who are supporting the industries that they are coming here to enjoy. And so even if, it started as a property tax thing, but then it turned into something more where, maybe just like throwing ideas out there here, but like maybe with your heli skiing, there's an opt-in, like businesses definitely don't have to offer it, but it's like, would you like to add another 1% to your booking fee? This goes towards like supporting the community and goes towards affordable housing. And they don't have to, but then, if I was owning a heli ski operation, I would think, this is pretty cool to add this feature in, because it shows that we're supporting the community, which they all do, because they're all wonderful people. Probably, I don't know them. They have great taste in outdoor activities. But yeah, I think everybody kind of wins in that scenario, and not forcing it on the customers. Anyways, just an idea, but I think before we're rolling it out into that big a scale, I think it would be really cool just to use it on a small scale with property taxes to test it out.
Yeah, I will definitely do some research. We've got a little bit of leeway lead time, I should say, before the tax notices have to go out.
Cool.
So I'll do some research on what it would take to actually modify the format of our tax return, because we actually it's not like in a Word document where we can just make changes, but I think we can make changes. Well, we can make changes too. It's just a matter of what it costs us to make them, right?
In my mind,
that's a very interesting concept. I've never had anyone ask that before.
Yeah, I think in my mind, having some kind of reserve set up for that money, like however you think it makes the most sense, but
that would make sense.
Yeah, and I think when we present it on that tax bill, like proposing a few uses might help people visualize how that money would best spent versus just saying like donate to the city, and people are gonna be like, no. So I think that needs to be thought of, and I think like affordable housing and transit are like nice easy ones, but there's I'm sure other like good causes that people would say like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or like maybe it's, I don't know, I guess in-kind donations are not always monetary, so I don't know how that would work, but stuff like that. Okay, cool. I had something else, but I don't remember, so it doesn't matter.
So some of the things that the community have reached out to you, Councillor Ryan, that you wanted to bring up.
Yes, I have that. Okay. So metered parking downtown. We have a transportation plan happening, right? And is this going to be part of that?
Mr. Black just stepped away from his desk, but
That's
yes, yeah. Transportation plan, Mr. Black, and metered parking, Ms. Ryan was bringing up.
Yes. Both.
It's being looked at. No.
Part of the, one of the components that was specifically spelled out in the proposal for, or the request for proposal for the transportation master plan was to address the downtown parking supply, whether there's a deficit or a surplus, and what the best policies are throughout the nation as far as what we should be looking at in order to manage parking in the downtown core. We have made no assumptions as to what the opportunities or constraints would be, the carrot or the stick. Is it parking meters? Is it better signage? Is it painting the curbs? All of those things will be part of the transportation master plan.
Okay, perfect. Glad to hear that, because I know a lot of people had mentioned on Victoria Street, you know, RVs in the summer, if there was kind of like a day rate, and I know that we're looking at that street in general and its uses and all that. So glad to hear that's on the radar. Increasing DCCs.
And so we have something coming to, I believe, Committee of the Whole that Miss Wade is bringing forward in dealing with some of these things. So I
Excellent.
think in the next, if not the next meeting, within the next month anyway, it's going to come to Committee of the Whole, and there'll be some information on that for us.
Perfect. Selling off unnecessary land. I mean, I feel like we don't have a ton of it, but
No,
like what?
it'd be
unfortunately
nice if we had a bunch. Are there any buildings that are not being used right now? Like at all, not for storage or not for anything, that are just being sitting idle?
No, they're all being occupied, and the only one that's not being used operationally is the Century Valley building that's being used for storage.
Right. Yep, that was on here as well. And so there's no homes or anything that are owned but not being rented out or occupied?
No,
Okay.
they're both occupied.
Okay. So finding illegal rental units. I guess that comes with vacation rental bylaw.
Yeah, and so vacation rentals, I think, is coming to the next Committee of the Whole. There'll be something on that in dealing with that. So there'll be definitely a whole report, I believe, Miss.
Are you referring? Sorry, you weren't sure. Are you referring to short-term rentals?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
didn't
okay, as opposed
specify,
to
there was
residential.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were both. There was people who had commented on just like homes that are stuffed full of, you know, way too many people. That just hard to enforce, I guess.
It is very hard to enforce.
Right. But vacation rentals, you're saying is coming forward. Okay.
It is.
Building an underground parking garage downtown. Before we comment on that, I'll just add in a few other ones that are kind of similar. I should get my pen and cross them off when I'm done. Overnight RV parking and pay-per-use showers, things like that. Is that something that economic development could, in theory, be looking at with RMI funds?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Ingrid that one.
Okay.
So you said underground parking? Oh, that's
Yeah.
expensive, isn't it, Mr. Black?
It's expensive. Yeah.
And then what was the other one? You said underground parking. You said
Overnight parking for RVs.
overnight parking.
And then pay-per-use showers.
I believe the community center, when it's open, non-COVID obviously, would include that you can, I believe that you can pay to shower in there, but I'm not 100%. I don't know if Lori's still on this.
Miss Donato's on, and she is
Oh, is
nodding
she?
her head
Oh.
in the affirmative. Go ahead, Miss
Yeah.
Donato.
Yeah, through your worship, yes, visitors are able to shower at the facility.
Okay. I think what they were maybe referring to is some place that is more suited for camping and people here who are here overnight. And there is
Like a garden hose kind of thing? Is that what they're thinking, or an
don't-
outdoor shower type deal? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering what they're thinking with that sort of thing.
I think they're thinking more like coin operated, or like sort of, if some of our washroom facilities were winterized, they could have
Gotcha.
also showers in there. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
And I just think it's worth, economic development thinking about it in some plans if they go to upgrade buildings, because there are definitely a lot of people who come here year round to camp, and we obviously don't have winterized facilities.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Okay,
Thank
this
you.
one just says take away council pay. I'm just gonna say it out loud so that it's on record. I
Okay.
personally don't support it, but
I'm not sure you get paid enough.
So offering paid driveway plowing. We had discussed this a little bit at the last meeting. I think it's Darren was saying that it's quite expensive to offer that as a service. So just saying it for the public.
And
if anyone's
yes, just a general comment on that would be you'd be competing with local businesses that already provide that service. And so it's
Oh,
not it's not one of the government services that we're mandated to provide. And so when we move outside of those, we have to be very careful that we're not competing with businesses.
Okay.
And there's,
sorry.
I just want to say, and there's several people that have seen that need in the past few years and have gone out and put out the finances to actually buy equipment and do that, and have done quite a good job. And then at some point, some of them are subcontracting, whether they're assisting the city, but assisting other larger companies with that sort of thing. So thank you for that. Carry on, Councillor Rowan.
So the golf course in the winter to groom a trail for cross country and then charge a pass for it. I don't know what gets done or if anything gets done in the winter.
They used to do that. Do they still do that? I know that Mr. Kemmerer and the Ilocos Greenbelt Society do that down on the Greenbelt. There used to be groomed trails around the golf course. I'm not sure whether they do that. I mean, it'd be pretty tough skiing this year on the golf course, but they used to do that on a regular basis, and I think that was part of the Nordic group, and there was a bit of a fee with that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I that sounds familiar, Gary. I don't cross country ski, so I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if Lori knows anything about it or not, but
yeah. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, rezoning the land near West Side Road and using it for residential homes. Does the city own that?
Some of it.
And it's not suitable for development because of the zoning, right?
Well, some of it is gravel pits, right? Right now, it's industrial or M1. Is that the zone? I'm not exactly sure, and Miss Wade's not here to
it's
define
one of the
that.
M's.
Yeah. So that's something that can be looked at as things progress when we have rehabilitation of some of those gravel pits. That might be something that may be looked into, but I guess, Mr. Black, I'll ask you. I mean, when we think about industrial and we're out there on West Side Road and all of a sudden we've got somebody crushing gravel, I'm not sure how many people want to live next door, but anyway,
one of my major concerns with putting different uses out on Airport Road is that we do not have a water system out there. And so once we start making that or zoning it that way, then we are, I think, obligated to provide a water service to that area. And if it stays as is, they would have to go onto groundwater, which I understand there are some issues with the groundwater in various locations in that part of the community.
And we've seen that happen just recently. RMR has some property out there, and they were looking at putting their workforce housing out there, and Interior Health said that the groundwater is not suitable for potable water.
Okay, that's very helpful information. I had no idea. Awesome. If a developer came along and was just wanting to develop that, they would be in charge of then putting in a water system, but then the city would have to maintain it. Is that how that would work usually?
It would depend on how the developer chose to pursue his opportunity. Given its distance from any utility that we have currently in place, it would be my opinion that the owner would be responsible for installing and operating a system, that we would not want to encumber the rest of the community with an isolated water system, much like the Big Eddy was. And you saw what we needed to do in order to bring that up to current standard.
So it
And
is
so-
possible that the city would just like sell it and then the developer would say, okay, we're gonna make our own little world here and our own little water system.
Yep, I'm just going to step in, Mr. Black. It is possible. We've seen that happen in the CSRD, Councilor Rind, to the point where we had 30 or 40 water systems in the CSRD, and some of them are defunct and some of them ended up falling back into the CSRD to look after because people went broke and that sort of thing. So there's always a concern about a private water long-term. And so, sorry, Mr. Black, I didn't mean to step on you, but I wanted to get that out from what my experience has been with some of the other stuff outlying.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know that. That makes sense. Okay, then I'll just move right on. Increased cost of the day rate for visitors accessing the community center. I know you had mentioned at the beginning that we didn't want to talk about this right now. Are we thinking of including that in the budget this year?
Ms. Donato?
Sure, through your worship. I started some initial research on this, and I think there is a lot more for us to consider before we implement something like that. So I'm hoping to come back to council with a staff report on pros and cons of implementing this type of system and other suggestions that maybe would be more desirable.
Okay, that makes sense. When are like for next year to be implemented for next year then?
Yes, for 2022.
Okay, sounds good. Ask local, streamline construction process to encourage development. I think we already have Marianne working hard to do that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Create new programming, cooking courses, fitness courses, personal interest courses. I'm curious to hear Ms. Donato's opinion on if there is an appetite to do that or if she has trouble breaking even on the existing programming that they offer.
I don't know whether Ms. Donato's there. We have had
That's
that
okay.
we've had that in the past where special interest groups,
Mhm.
you know, where especially cooking, where I know that my wife and I took some ethnic cooking, Mexican, Japanese, that sort of thing in previous years. So Ms. Donato, we're talking about some of the extra programming, some of the cultural stuff, cooking, that sort of thing. And so, Ms. Rind, I'll get you to just say what you had on your list.
Oh yeah, it's just about whether creating new programming would be a possible way of increasing revenue, or if you think it's difficult enough to break even with the courses that you do offer or program.
Typically, we do offer a lot of different cultural programs, different cooking classes, but with the COVID restrictions in place right now, that's been a bit of a challenge. It's hard actually finding instructors to take these courses on right now with all the COVID restrictions that they have to follow. They need to keep their numbers down, so then their profit margins aren't as high as they'd like them to be. So that we found that really challenging right now. So hopefully in September things will change and then we can be open for more programming in the facility. But currently that's where we're sitting with programming right now.
Okay, great. Thanks. So bringing in a delegation bylaw, I remember, I think Marianne had mentioned that was on the radar, but I personally don't understand it super well, and she's not here to explain it, so I can wait. But if somebody understands it, if they could help me understand
Well,
it, that'd be great.
let's let her weigh in, and then we get proper comment.
Okay, I can hold off on that one.
Thank you.
Going paperless at City Hall, I feel like there are things that probably legislatively have to be on paper. But any input on that from anyone?
Well, we keep all of our minutes and everything, even though everything's transcribed digitally. We do have to keep them in a book, and so they are transcribed into paper and are signed off by myself and the CAO, and so they're they're kept for records. We try to go through everything here in the administration department is as digital as it can be, and very little things are printed off if they don't have to be. I know that even in Mr. Black's department, they try to keep things as digital as possible, but every once in a while there are paper things that need to be printed, plans and that sort of thing. So I think from my perspective, anyway, from what I'm seeing is that the staff do the best they can, and there's all kinds of emails that come across before you print this. Make sure you absolutely need to see it in writing and or in paper form. So I think they're doing what they can, and but that Ms. McCabe, I'll let you weigh in.
I was going to say, yes, I know that obviously the finance department is usually one of the ones that creates a lot of paper as well. And we have definitely, we were already starting to shift to paperless, but the COVID has definitely pushed that further. And my staff are really liking it. And so there's definitely, I would suggest that other than stuff that comes in the mail, there's not a lot that gets printed in most departments nowadays.
Cool.
Other than checks.
Yes, well, we do print the checks. We're trying to change that, though.
Yeah, that is old school.
It is.
Okay. Contracting out services versus hiring permanent staff. I think engineering probably does a lot of that, right? I don't know.
Mr. Black?
It would be quite fun for us to review all of our expenditures that we do. My department is severely understaffed. And so this is something that because of that, we have to go out and use a lot of consultants. So if you use a good rule of thumb, an employee is typically paid, or the expenses for an employee is typically 3 times their salary. So somebody makes $50 an hour, that's usually $150 an hour impact to the city's budget. A consultant will typically cost us $150 to $300 an hour. And so in many cases, it's more beneficial for us to have staff in-house for much of the work that we do. Specialists, obviously, we would go out for, but there is a break-even point where it's beneficial to have people here in the office versus in Kelowna or Kamloops and paying them to commute and or that hourly rate.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Ms.
That's a
McCabe?
cool rule.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just want to speak up too. A lot of times too, the choice between contracting out or in-house is based on the volume of workflow and workload that's available. So sometimes if you have a one-off project, then you are going to contract it out. When we get to the critical mass point where there's enough work to keep somebody busy full-time and the cost is comparable or less, then we definitely do start looking at bringing that position in-house. You have to look at it long-term, because obviously once you've brought somebody in-house and they're a staff employee, then they're permanent and they're on the budget if for the rest of time. Effectively, that position is. Once you contract out, sometimes it works good to do that when you're trying to fill a short-term need. So yes, you have to look at whether it's short-term or long-term need and the cost of it.
Can you hire somebody on a short-term contract?
We have for certain positions, but it's not normal, especially within the union environment, to do that. So we have for one position that I'm aware of.
Couldn't it be an exempt position?
It depends on what the position's doing. Yes, we have to be, yeah. There's certain rules and criteria that have to be discussed with the union before we make a position exempt.
And for the budget, then, if the engineering department is really understaffed, like what is that? What are you guys doing about it? I'm just curious. Like, is there a reflection in our long-term budget where we've increased the wages?
At this point, we've got quite a good budget in there for contracted services, and so we would look at that as well as the contracted services that are being charged out to capital projects, and we would use those to look and see if there's enough budget there to actually hire another person, especially if it's a permanent where we need that person on a long-term basis. Definitely.
Okay. Reduce the level of plowing, concentrate on main streets, and do side streets only once in a while. I imagine that's probably tricky because of our melt freeze environment. Is that correct?
That is a policy that council has adopted. If council chooses to amend that policy, we can certainly bring that forward. Typically, I would not recommend that we abandon certain parts of town, so to speak, only because the liability associated with a potential fire or something like that, if emergency vehicles could not get to a location, then the city would become liable for that sort of thing. So it's a risk analysis that would need to take place. And generally speaking, I would suggest that it's not something that we should do just for that reason alone.
That makes a lot of sense. Man, you guys are full of answers. Who knew? Just kidding. We knew that. We all knew that. Okay, the flowers downtown. I know it's a sad one, but how much of an expense is it really?
Mr. Nato, any comment?
Your worship, I don't have the exact numbers
That's okay.
on that. That's something I'd have to speak with the operations manager. A few years back when we looked at it, it was roughly, I think, like $11,000 for the season.
Cool. So not very much and very beautiful.
Yeah,
That would just be the baskets too, right, Lori? Because the actual planters are all perennials.
yeah, so
For the most part.
every year in February, we place the order for the baskets, and then it's the staff time to maintain them in the summer as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then my last one. This one says, stop renting out space for council meetings, change chamber location to somewhere in City Hall.
Oh, that'd be nice.
It is kind of an interesting point. At first I was like, well, we need it. But now that we're doing all digital meetings, of course, we don't know how long this is going to last. But does the chamber get used right now by staff?
In some cases, we have meetings over there,
Okay.
either development services or engineering, or even we're having meetings with our public works department and our management department.
Okay, and there's no other kind of space that would be suitable in City Hall?
We've looked at that prior to. We used to have the boardroom up here. Years ago, down in finance department was council chambers, I believe. And so we've moved all over the place, and it's getting enough space. Because we needed the office space, we don't have the space now big enough for council chambers. And that's to allow public and still have private space for work.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for going through that.
Great, thanks. So Ms. McCabe, is there any resolution or anything that you need from us before we call it a
Yes,
day?
so I just kind of have a quick recap because I think I just kind of need to comment a little bit on some of that. So we've kind of talked about it. At this point, there's a lot of great ideas here. I'm not sure that I see anything that would have any immediate impact on the operating and the capital budgets as they've been presented. I think these are things that would definitely be worth considering and looking at what the impacts would be on a budget, to the budget in particular, going forward when we get into the next budget cycle for sure. So if you got a comment, Jackie?
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to save them and get feedback so that people felt like, got some feedback on what they wanted to contribute. But I like what you presented here and would make a motion to put that forward with the exception or with the addition of maybe allowing some additional resourcing in the finance department for whatever time it would take to implement that addition to the property tax thing, because I think that would be a cool pilot project thingy to try.
I have some contracted services budget that I could potentially use and some casual budget, so I will definitely look into doing that.
Cool.
So yes, so that would be what I would require, Your Worship, is a resolution to bring forward the budget that as it's being presented to the Finance Committee with the additions that were made today for the capital projects, to bring that forward to Council for their review.
Councillor Ryan, did you want to make that motion?
Yep, I'll make that motion.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Charlotte or Councillor Elliott? Councillor Charlotte, seconding that. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, Councillor Elliott, go ahead.
Yeah, just I've had several people contact me in the past about the contract services, and I'm wondering whether that's thoroughly been fleshed out. Whether we, the staffing. I know the union issue is something that we have to address, but I know Stephen mentioned about his contracting at the engineering, but that seems to be for very technical work. I know we buy equipment and keep the staff, employees working, but I don't know if we've had an arbitrary assessment of what's the most cost-effective way to do business or do the business of the city. And maybe that's something that we should be putting into our, if we're looking at planning and finding out the best way to run or developing a plan for the future, maybe we should start thinking about how we can keep our costs low and exploring these things, and whether we should put some effort into getting an independent assessment of what's right, what's the best route to take. I don't know if that makes sense, but for me, I think we need an arbitrary decision. Or arbitrary.
I think that's something that we can definitely discuss as we move forward. The motion on the table was putting the budget forward as we've talked about today. Do you feel that that's suitable to move forward, or is this something that you need to flesh out, Councillor Elliott, regarding your comments that you just made?
Well, I think we've had a discussion in the past about some of the parameters to build a budget, and I think it was clear from my perspective that we keep it at 0%. And somehow now we're 2%, and we're living with that, or better. So I'm not 100% sure I would support it.
Okay. Any further comments? So this is to put the motion on the table, Councillor Elliott, is to put it to Council, and Council, again, you will have a chance to discuss that in the council realm.
So at the tentative rates we're talking now is 1.7 for the staff wage increase and 2% as the transportation fee.
No, just 2%. The other one is offset. We've offset the wage increases required by reducing other budgets in other areas.
Mm-hmm. But we've also reduced the contribution to the transportation budget. We've taken $500,000 out of that. Is that right? No,
we haven't reduced. We haven't reduced what we're putting into it. We're using so that's an annual contribution, of course. Right. At this point, we're adding some projects to the capital budget that will use some of the funds in that reserve fund. Yes.
But it should bring our transportation reserve to 0. Is that what I understand?
It will bring it low. Yes. How low will remain to be seen, depending on what gets spent in this year and next year for the different road projects. They don't spend them all. Sometimes they do. And so unfortunately, I can't predict that 100%, but it is definitely getting low. And the reason for pointing that out is because I think it's very important that we maintain that 2% tax increase to fund the roads.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. I'd fund the roads that needs to be maintained, but the corollary to that is that we start finding other ways to cut the costs. So I don't know if we've dug deep enough. Maybe my perspective, I haven't. Anyway,
we can start. We can have those discussions as we move forward with roads and that sort of thing. Anything further in regards to the motion on the table, Councillor Elliott?
No.
Okay. I just got a text message from Councillor Brooks Hill. His internet has stopped working. So I'm going to call the question on this. We're going to move this forward, this budget information that we've got here today, including the new works for the capital projects, to Council, and Council will deliberate on that. Anything further before I ask the question? All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Elliott is opposed and Councillor Rind, Mayor Sauls, Councillor Charlotte are in favor. Thank you. Anything further on this meeting today? Okay.
No.
I'm going to ask for termination of the meeting. Someone want to make that motion, please? Councillor Rind and seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right. Thank you all. Thanks for your time today. Bye
Thank
for
you
now.
very much. I appreciate all the feedback.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Still there, Jen?
I am. Yeah, I'm here. Jeez.
All by yourself in the department, or did the cleaners come in?
No, the cleaner, he's been vacuuming around me. Yeah. Oh.
I've taken lots of notes.
Yep.
Yeah, so you can take a first stab at it, see how far
Okay.
you get, and then
Yeah.
I will go ahead and and then send off. Probably, I don't know what your workload's like the next couple days.
Yep.
Probably sooner rather than later. Be good if you can.
Start on the minutes.
Just
Yeah.
because I find it easier when it's fresh in my brain.
Yep, for sure.
That was an interesting concept from Jackie about putting do you want to make an extra
Donations?
donation? You know what? You know what? For giggles and farts, why not, right? See what kind of response you get. I'm just not sure what the cost is of adding that onto the tax notice.
Yeah. But then what I was thinking there was that people could get upset, be like, oh, you guys took our donations and you spent it here when I donated because I wanted it to go to
yes,
this. There would be a lot of
exactly.
opposition there.
Yes, there could be some definite risk there. And so, I'll have to think a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
God, Elliot, he just doesn't get it. But
No, he doesn't
anyways,
at all. Yeah.
I'm going to have to twist some arms though with Steve and say,
Oh,
okay.
Oh, Tanya,
Yeah.
we're recording still.
Oh, are we? Oops. Can you back it up at all? Oh, yeah, you probably can. Check with Jeff.
Okay.
Ask Jeff, because I'm sure he knows how to edit YouTube videos.
Okay, well, let's end this meeting.
Yeah.
And yes.
You just stop recording it. Will that kick us out?
Yep.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
can hop on the phone with you.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.